July 4th, 1954. Bay Village, Ohio. 31-year-old Marilyn Reese Sheppard is bludgeoned to death inside her bedroom, and her 30-year-old husband Sam Sheppard is injured after claiming he was attacked by an intruder. Police believe that Sam fabricated the story and was responsible for killing his wife, so he's charged and convicted of Marilyn's murder. After spending nearly 10 years in prison, Sam's conviction is overturned and he is acquitted at his retrial, but even though attempts are made to posthumously exonerate him decades later, the crime remains shrouded in mystery. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to another special milestone for The Trail Went Cold, our 9-year anniversary show. I am your host, Robin Warder, and whenever we commemorate our podcast's anniversary each year, I like to make it a tradition to go the extra mile and put together a special multi-part episode. And this time around, we'll be doing a deep dive into a crime which led to one of the most sensational trials of the 20th century, the 1954 murder of Marilyn Reese Sheppard. This is an extremely controversial and convoluted story, and since there is so much to discuss here, this will be our podcast's very first 3-part episode. Marilyn Reese Sheppard was the wife of a prominent physician named Sam Sheppard, and they lived together in a lakefront home in Bay Village, Ohio, with their 7-year-old son. At the time, Marilyn was 4 months pregnant, but the family's world would be shattered when she was bludgeoned to death inside her bedroom in the middle of the night. Since Sam had fallen asleep in the den, he claimed that he was woken up by his wife's screams and ran upstairs to help her, but wound up being attacked and knocked out by someone whom he described as a quote-unquote bushy-haired intruder. Even though Sam did sustain some injuries, the police began to suspect that he fabricated this entire story and killed Marilyn himself, particularly after they learned that he had been conducting an extramarital affair. Sam would be charged and convicted of Marilyn's murder and received a sentence of life imprisonment, but the local media coverage of the case was so sensationalized and heavily biased towards Sam that his conviction wound up being overturned. In fact, after Sam received representation by an aspiring defense attorney named F. Lee Bailey, his case made it all the way to the United States Supreme Court, who ruled that Sam did not receive a fair trial, and when the state took him to trial again, he wound up being acquitted. But this was still not the end of the story, as Sam's son would file a civil lawsuit and make an unsuccessful attempt to posthumously exonerate his father decades later. At this particular point in time, the central narrative seems to have been that Sam Sheppard was an innocent man who was wrongly convicted for a crime he did not commit, and a false rumor which is always spread is that the hit TV series and subsequent movie adaptation The Fugitive were inspired by this case. However, opinions about the crime are sharply divided, as books supporting both Sam's innocence and guilt have been published. All of the case materials, including the original police reports and trial transcripts, have been digitally archived online and are available at the Cleveland State University website, and once you start going through everything, it's really easy to change your opinion about what happened several times. I decided this would be a neat topic for our anniversary episode because back in early 2016, when I was just starting The Trail Went Cold, I was searching around for other true crime podcasts and stumbled upon another little show that was just starting out titled True Crime Garage. Their episode about this case was the first one I ever listened to, and I figured I wanted to tackle it someday, but surprisingly, it does not appear to have gotten a lot of extensive coverage in the true crime podcasting world. Well, today's episode will cover the murder investigation and the original trial, which was dubbed the Trial of the Century, and next Wednesday, February the 26th, I'll be dropping Part 2, which covers Sam Sheppard's retrial and the civil trial which took place decades later. And on the Wednesday after that, March the 5th, I'll provide my theories and analysis, as well as my own personal opinion about who I believe murdered Marilyn Reese Sheppard. Anyway, before we get started, just a quick reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast, which is currently available for download on several platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Podcast Addict, and more. So if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review on any of those sites to help spread the word. The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so if you would like to learn how to support the show, please visit our page at patreon.com/thetrailwentcold. For as little as $1 a month, you can garner access to exclusive rewards, including stickers and thank you cards, early access to episodes, and bonus content, as our Patreon page has around 80 exclusive bonus episodes in archives, which are not available on a regular feed. I also wanted to announce that this coming Saturday, February the 22nd, we'll be holding one of our annual Unsolved Mysteries live watch marathons, in which I screen classic segments from the show, and you can watch them and chat with myself and your fellow listeners. It's taking place at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and if you'd like to join us, you can find the link to our screening room in our show notes, as well as pinned to the top of our social media pages. Hope to see you there. So with all that out of the way, let us now begin part 1 of our series about the murder of Marilyn Reese Sheppard. Our story begins in Ohio in 1954, and our victim is 31-year-old Marilyn Reese Sheppard. For the past 9 years, Marilyn has been married to her 30-year-old husband, Sam Sheppard. Marilyn was born in Cleveland to parents Thomas and Dorothy Reese, but when Marilyn was only 5 years old, the family suffered a major tragedy when Dorothy became pregnant with a son, and they both died during childbirth. Marilyn spent a good chunk of her childhood living with her aunt and uncle, but even though her father remarried, Marilyn said that she never felt particularly close to him or her stepmother. Sam Sheppard was also born in Cleveland and was the youngest of 3 sons to Richard and Ethel Sheppard. Richard was a prominent physician who specialized in osteopathic medicine, and Sam and his 2 older brothers, Steve and Richard Jr., would follow in their father's footsteps. Sam and Marilyn originally met and began a relationship while attending Cleveland Heights High School, and following graduation, Sam enrolled at Hanover College in Indiana to study pre-osteopathic medical courses, and then took supplementary courses at the Case Institute of Technology in Cleveland. Sam and Marilyn then decided to relocate to California so Sam could attend the Los Angeles Osteopathic School of Physicians and Surgeons. He was awarded the Doctor Osteopathic Medicine medical degree and completed an internship and residency in neurosurgery at the Los Angeles County General Hospital. While living in California, Sam and Marilyn decided to get married and gave birth to a son named Sam Reese Sheppard Jr., who went by the nickname Chip. They eventually decided to move back to Ohio so Sam could join his father's osteopathic medical practice at Bayview Hospital, where he worked alongside his 2 brothers. The Sheppards moved into a 4-bedroom, 2-story beachfront house on Lake Road in Bay Village, a western suburb of Cleveland located in Cuyahoga County, alongside the southern shore of Lake Erie, which had a population of around 8,000 at that time. At this particular point, the couple are known for having very active social lives in the community, as Marilyn teaches Sunday school at Bay Methodist Church, and she has recently announced that she is 4 months pregnant with her second child. On the evening of Saturday, July the 3rd, the Sheppards invited 2 of their neighborhood friends, Dawn and Nancy Ahern, over to their house for a dinner party. The Aherns were accompanied by their 2 children, and after dinner, Dawn took his kids back home to put them to bed, while Marilyn tucked in her 7-year-old son Chip for the night. After Dawn returned, the 2 couples sat down to watch a movie on television, but Sam had worked a very busy day at the emergency room at Bayview Hospital, which included making a failed attempt to save the life of a boy who was fatally hit with a truck. As a result, Sam was pretty exhausted, so he decided to move to a daybed in the living room near the foot of the staircase and fell asleep. At around 12:30 a.m. on the morning of July the 4th, Marilyn escorted the Aherns out of the house, and they claimed that Sam was still sleeping on the daybed when they left. But sometime over the course of the next 5 hours, an horrific crime would take place, which has been heavily analyzed and debated over the past 70 years. At around 5:40 a.m., the mayor of Bay Village, Spencer Houck, who also happened to be one of the Sheppard's neighbors and closest friends, was woken up by a phone call. When Spencer answered the phone, he heard Sam speaking in a panicked voice, saying, quote, "My God, Spen, get over here quick. I think they've killed Marilyn," end quote. Spencer and his wife, Esther Houck, quickly rushed over to the Sheppard residence, and when they went inside, they came across Sam sitting in a swivel chair in the den. He was shirtless, and his pants appeared to be wet and had a blood stain on the left knee. The right side of his face was swollen and bruised, and Sam was also holding his neck. When he spoke, the Houcks noticed that a light film of blood was coating his teeth, 2 of which were chipped. He said, quote, "I don't know what happened, but someone should do something for Marilyn," end quote. Esther went upstairs to check the guest bedroom and was horrified to discover that the floor and walls were covered in blood, and Marilyn's body was lying face up in a pool of blood in her bed. Her pajama top was rolled up around her neck, exposing her breasts, and her pajama bottoms had been removed from the left leg and pulled down, leaving her pubic area exposed. Marilyn's legs had also been pulled beneath the wooden crossbar at the foot of her bed. She had sustained so much damage to her face that she was practically unrecognizable. Esther checked Marilyn's pulse but could not find one, so she ran back downstairs and told her husband to call the Bay Village Police Department. Spencer would also call Sam's brother Richard, who lived nearby. Sam asked if his son Chip was okay, so Esther went back upstairs to check the boy's bedroom and confirmed that he was sound asleep. So now we're going to talk about Sam's account about what happened. There's always been a lot of controversy about this, since Sam would gradually change or add certain details in each retelling of his story over the course of the next few days, but here is an approximate quote from his first version of events that he shared with the Houcks. Quote, "I don't know exactly what happened. All I remember is waking up on the couch, and I heard Marilyn screaming, and I started up the stairs, and something or somebody clobbered me, and the next thing I remember, I came down to the beach, and I think I tried to do something for Marilyn, and that's all I know. That's all I know." End quote. The first Bay Village police officer to arrive at the scene was Patrolman Fred Drenkin, who also happened to be a friend of the Sheppards. He instantly noticed that the contents of Sam's medical bag, which included vials and other supplies, were strewn all over the hallway. A high school track trophy belonging to Sam and a bowling trophy belonging to Marilyn were scratched and broken on the floor of the den. After Drenkin went into the guest bedroom and saw Marilyn's body, he went back downstairs and noticed that the drawers of a desk belonging to Marilyn were open in the living room. The drawers of a desk belonging to Sam were also pulled out and stacked on top of each other in the study, so on the surface, it appeared that an attempted burglary had taken place. Drenkin then asked Sam what happened, and here's an exact transcript from his original police report. Quote, "Questioned Dr. Sheppard as to what had occurred. He stated that he remembered hearing Marilyn scream, of going upstairs, of fighting down the stairs, of waking up in water, of coming upstairs. He made those remarks in that order, none of them tied together. He then turned his head and held his neck with both hands and said no more." End quote. Richard soon arrived at the residence and went upstairs to briefly examine Marilyn's body and see if there was anything he could do for her. When Richard came back downstairs and informed his brother that Marilyn was gone, Sam cried out, quote, "No, no, no." After Drenkin performed a search of the house, he could not find any signs of forced entry. Since the Bay Village Police Department was not used to dealing with violent homicides like this, Drenkin suggested to Mayor Houck that they seek out the assistance of the Cleveland Police Department, and Houck agreed. A number of law enforcement figures were eventually summoned to the Sheppard residence, including Bay Village Police Chief John Eaton, Michael Gabrowski, a detective from the Cleveland PD Fingerprint Unit, Robert Schottky and Pat Garreau, a pair of detectives from the Cleveland PD Homicide Unit, and Cuyahoga County Coroner Dr. Samuel Gerber. Sam's other brother, Steve Sheppard, who lived in the nearby suburb of Rocky River, was also notified about what happened by Richard's wife, Dorothy. Steve and his own wife, Betty, arrived at around 6:20 a.m., and after he examined Sam's injuries, he agreed to drive him to the family clinic, Bayview Hospital, for treatment. It was apparent that Chip had slept through the entire attack on his mother, and he would be taken out of bed and driven to his Uncle Richard's house. The Sheppards also owned a dog named Coco, but even though she had a habit of barking at strangers, and there had supposedly been an intruder in the house, no one reported hearing any barking from Coco that morning. When police performed a forensic examination of the residence, they discovered drops of blood on various floors in various rooms. There were small drops of dry blood on the stairs, as well as blood smears on the door jamb and knob plate of the pane glass living room door which led to the porch. Traces of blood spots were found on a brass plate behind a drawer handle of Sam's desk, which seemed to indicate that someone had opened it with blood on their finger. Detective Grabowski dusted the house for fingerprints, and he also took photos of some footprints and shoe prints in the sand on the beach, though they were too shallow and sandy to take casts of. Marilyn was examined and officially pronounced dead by Dr. Gerber, and when her body was removed, 2 of her teeth fragments were found in the bedsheets. Dr. Gerber then drove to Bayview Hospital to question Sam, but long before this crime took place, Gerber was already familiar with the Sheppard family and known for not liking them since they practiced osteopathy, which he felt was faulty medical science. He questioned Sam for about 10 minutes and took his clothing as evidence. Like I mentioned earlier, Sam's pants had a large blood stain on the left knee and were soaked and waterlogged. He also had grains of sand in his pants and socks, which seemed to support his story about being knocked out on the beach. Sam had his wallet in his pocket, so Gerber collected it as evidence as well. It's been reported that at some point that morning, Gerber told the police, quote, "Well, men, it is evident the doctor did this, so let's get the confession out of him," end quote. At around 11 a.m., Cleveland PD homicide detectives Robert Schottky and Patrick Garreau showed up at Bayview Hospital to question Sam. Since he was heavily sedated, Sam did not share many specific details, but he provided another vague story about hearing his wife screaming and getting knocked out by someone after he ran upstairs, and he also mentioned being knocked out a second time after he regained consciousness and waking up on the beach. During the questioning, Steve Sheppard kept walking into the room, and the detectives kept asking him to wait outside, but after Steve told them that he needed to treat Sam's injuries, they left. A search was performed of the area surrounding the Sheppard residence, and at around 1:30 p.m., Spencer Houck's teenage son discovered a green canvas bag in the weeds on the hillside leading down to the beach. Sam would later identify this as a bag where he usually kept his boat tools, and it contained a number of Sam's personal items, including his wristwatch, a class ring, and a fraternity charm from Hanover College, a key, and a keychain. The watch also had traces of dried blood on the metal band and condensation under the crystal, and the wristband was damaged. On the surface, it did appear that an attempted burglary had taken place at the Sheppard residence, but the police were suspicious that the whole thing may have been staged. I previously mentioned that the drawers on Marilyn's desk in the living room had been opened, but investigators felt they all appeared to be open in an oddly similar way. They also found it strange that the 5 drawers that had been pulled out of Sam's desk in the study were all stacked in a very neat fashion on top of each other. A green metal box was tipped on its side near the desk, and several tools and Marilyn's yellow gold wristwatch had spilled out. But curiously, even though Marilyn had worn some rings to bed, none of them were removed from her fingers. At around 2 o'clock that afternoon, Detective Schottky and Garreau returned to Bayview Hospital to perform their second round of questioning with Sam and were accompanied by Bay Village Police Chief John Eaton. While he would add a few details to his story later on, here is the version of events that Sam would stick to over the next several years. Sam confirmed that he had fallen asleep on the downstairs daybed the previous night and was woken up by Marilyn screaming during the early morning hours. When he ran upstairs into the guest bedroom, Sam said that he saw what he described as a quote-unquote form with a white garment standing next to Marilyn's bed. Since it was dark, Sam claimed that he never saw this person's face and could not even tell if they were a man or a woman, which is why he always referred to them as a quote-unquote form and never specifically mentioned a gender. Sam then said that he was knocked unconscious after being struck on the back of the neck, but before he passed out, he thought he could hear what sounded like the moans of an injured person. Sam eventually woke up and noticed that Marilyn was now a bloody mess in her bed, so he checked her pulse and determined that she was dead. Sam then went to Chip's room and saw that his son was still sleeping and had not been harmed, but he soon heard a noise from downstairs. Sam looked down to see what he described as a quote-unquote bushy-haired intruder in the living room, who opened the pane glass door leading to the porch before they ran outside. Sam decided to chase after this person and followed them out of the house, and he soon caught up to them on the beach next to Lake Erie, about 50 feet away, before he was rendered unconscious for a second time. By the time Sam woke up, he was lying in some water on the beach and his attacker was gone. He then went back into the house and once again checked the guest bedroom to confirm that Marilyn was dead before he called the house for help. Well, right from the outset, Schottky and Garreau had a number of issues with Sam's story. There were no signs of forced entry at the residence, but Sam claimed that it was Marilyn's habit to leave the front door unlocked when they were home. Don and Nancy Nahern were later questioned about this, but said they honestly could not remember if Marilyn locked the door behind them when she escorted them out of the house after the dinner party. But Nancy did confirm that she personally used the chain to lock the pane glass living room door leading to the porch, even though this chain was off by the time police arrived. Sam confirmed that he had been wearing a corduroy jacket and a white t-shirt when he went to sleep, and this jacket was found neatly folded on the daybed. The detectives found it suspicious that Sam would have taken the time to remove his jacket and fold it if he was awakened by the sound of his wife screaming, but Sam's explanation was that he recalled waking up sometime in the middle of the night and taking the jacket off before falling back asleep. However, Sam was shirtless by the time police arrived at the scene, and when asked for an explanation of what happened to the t-shirt he had been wearing when he went to sleep, Sam simply replied, quote, "I don't know." Sam wondered if the intruder might have taken it from him after he was knocked unconscious, but Schottky and Garreau suspected that it may have contained incriminating evidence, such as blood, so Sam disposed of it somewhere. On July the 14th, a torn white t-shirt was found hanging on a prong of wire on a crumbling concrete pier located near the Sheppard property. It appeared to have stains on it, but forensic testing turned up no traces of blood, and even though Sam owned a number of other white t-shirts which were the same size and brand as the one found on the wire, it was never conclusively proven if this was the same shirt Sam had worn on the night of the murder. Sam confirmed that he had been wearing his wristwatch when he was attacked, and believed that the intruder took the watch, his fraternity ring, and his key from him while he was unconscious, but investigators could not understand why this person would have put these items inside a canvas bag and just abandoned it nearby. When Sam was asked about the traces of blood found on the band of his watch, he replied that it must have gotten on there the first time he checked Marilyn's pulse. But aside from the stain on his pants, no blood was found anywhere on Sam when police first arrived, not even on his hands or his wrists, even though he never admitted to having washed or cleaned them. This led to speculation that Sam may have jumped into Lake Erie in order to clean the blood off himself. Before detectives even told Sam about the condensation underneath the watch's crystal, Sam preemptively stated that water would likely be found there because he had worn the watch when he went golfing in the rain a few days earlier. Detectives also found it suspicious that Sam's watch had stopped at 4:15, a full hour and a half before Sam called the Haug residence for help. In addition, there's been some controversy about the discovery of Marilyn's wristwatch, which was found next to the tipped-over green metal box in the study. Dr. Gerber would later tell the press that the watch had stopped at 3:17, which suggested that Marilyn may have been attacked much earlier than Sam claimed. However, one police officer said that before the watch was collected as evidence, he had seen it resting on a desk in the den that morning, and it read 11:30 and was still running. Another thing which Schottky and Garreau found suspicious is that Sam had his wallet in his pants pocket when he turned them over as evidence at the hospital. When asked about this, Sam suddenly added a new detail about how when he regained consciousness in the guest's bedroom, he noticed the wallet on the floor, as the intruder may have tried to steal it before they fled the scene. Sam then proceeded to put the wallet into his pocket before he headed downstairs. After the detectives concluded their questioning of Sam, Schottky told him, quote, "The evidence points very strongly towards you, and that, in my opinion, you are the one who killed your wife," end quote. Now, depending on what source you read, there are different versions of what happened next. According to police, Sam never responded to Schottky's accusation or attempted to deny it, and the detectives felt that Sam sounded unusually calm and collected when he recounted his ordeal. But Sam claimed that he started sobbing and called his brother Richard into the room, who recommended he get a lawyer. Schottky and Garreau recommended to Chief Eaton that Sam be arrested or at least held for questioning for a few days, but at that point, Eaton and Mayor Houck were reluctant to do so. The Cleveland PD believed that since Sam had functioned as the surgeon for the Bay Valley PD, the local authorities were initially reluctant to treat him as a serious suspect. Marilyn's autopsy was performed by Dr. Lester Adelson, the assistant Cuyahoga coroner at that time, and if you're an Unsolved Mysteries fan, that name might sound familiar, since he was interviewed during their segment about the unexplained 1981 death of Kurt Sova, which took place in the Cleveland suburb of Newburgh Heights. He determined that Marilyn had been bludgeoned to death, as she suffered a total of 35 wounds to her head, arms, and hands. Her nose had been broken, and her eyelids were bruised and swollen shut, but since Marilyn suffered at least 4 blows to her left hand and wrist, it appeared that she had put up a fight against her killer and possibly scratched them. When Dr. Adelson performed a vaginal swab, it turned up no traces of sperm or any recent sexual activity, but he did not perform a thorough check of her body or her bed sheets for the possible presence of seminal fluid. Adelson also did not do a chemical analysis to determine if she experienced sexual intercourse in the 48 hours prior to her death, as back then, it was not standard practice to perform this on married victims. Adelson originally estimated that Marilyn's time of death was sometime between 4:15 and 4:45 a.m. that morning, but this would become another controversial point in the case. When Dr. Gerber started publicly naming Sam as a suspect, he told the press that Marilyn's death had taken place between 3 and 4 a.m., as this was intended to plant seeds of suspicion about why Sam did not call the Houcks until 5:40 a.m. Another misleading statement that Gerber told the media was that the Sheppard residence had been wiped clean of fingerprints, which he felt pointed towards the murder being an inside job. This was not actually true, as Detective Grabowski, the fingerprint expert from the Cleveland PD, had checked a number of items for fingerprints, but was only able to turn up smudge prints, which were not identifiable enough to be compared to anyone. Grabowski was also criticized for not being thorough enough, as he failed to check a number of surfaces in the house where an intruder could have left prints, such as the stairway railing. There was also criticism directed towards the Bay Village PD for allowing outsiders into the residence before Dr. Gerber and the Cleveland PD arrived, which may have contaminated potential evidence. For instance, the Sheppards happened to be friends and neighbors with Otto Graham, a star football player for the Cleveland Browns, who was considered to be one of the top quarterbacks in the National Football League at that time. When Graham heard about what happened that morning, he showed up at the Sheppard residence, and the officers on duty actually allowed him to explore the house and enter the blood-spattered bedroom before it was sealed off as a crime scene. Even though the authorities had their suspicions about Sam, he had undeniably suffered some serious injuries at the hand of someone, as the right side of his face was seriously bruised. He was treated by his brother Steve, who claimed that Sam had suffered life-threatening neck injuries and had a fractured vertebra. When Marilyn's funeral took place, Sam was forced to attend in a wheelchair while wearing an orthopedic collar, and he also had to wear sunglasses due to his sensitivity to light. In spite of this, investigators suspected that since Sam had been treated by his own brothers at his family's hospital, they greatly exaggerated the seriousness of his injuries. Sam would retain the services of Bill Corrigan, who was considered to be the most prominent defense attorney in Cleveland at that time. On July the 5th, Schottky and Garreau made another attempt to interview Sam in the hospital before they were interrupted by Corrigan and Steve Sheppard, who said that Sam was in no condition to be questioned. At one point, the two detectives spoke to Steve and tried to talk him into convincing his brother to make a confession, but Steve adamantly insisted that Sam did not kill Marilyn. Corrigan ultimately agreed to allow his client to be questioned on July the 8th, but one of the conditions was that the interview could not be conducted by Schottky or Garreau, but rather Bay Village patrolman Fred Drenken, as well as a detective from the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department named Carl Rosbach. During his interview with them, Sam turned down the request for him to take a polygraph as he felt he was too upset for the results of the test to be reliable. Sam also added an additional detail which he never mentioned during his previous statements, now claiming that he had caught up with the intruder on the beach and engaged in a scuffle with them before this person started choking him and he wound up unconscious. By now, Allegations had started circulating that Sam was being uncooperative with investigators, so Sam issued a public statement in which he announced a $10,000 reward for the capture of Marilyn's killer and declared, quote, "I have never refused to talk to any authorities or give them any information I had," end quote. The following day, with Corrigan at his side, Sam agreed to meet up with Dr. Gerber and Detective Rossbach and escort them through his house, and he confirmed that nothing appeared to be stolen or missing. While there, Sam noticed that a group of reporters, photographers, and spectators had gathered on the lawn and kept protesting that he wanted them off the property, stating, quote, "Marilyn wouldn't like it." On July the 10th, Sam agreed to submit himself to questioning from Detective Schottky and Garreau without his attorney present, and he finally gave his first formal signed statement recounting the events he experienced on the night of the murder. But since 6 days had passed by that point, the detectives believed that Sam had used that time to fine-tune his fabricated story. Well, by this point, investigators had received information that Sam had been conducting an extramarital affair with a 24-year-old woman named Susan Hayes, who had once worked alongside him as a lab technician at Bayview Hospital, but had since relocated to Downey, California. They informed Sam about these allegations during questioning, but he denied ever having an affair with Susan and said they were nothing more than good friends. Well, this couldn't have been further from the truth, as Sam and Susan had been carrying on an affair since she started working at the hospital in 1951. In fact, Sam had a long history of infidelity dating back to when he and Marilyn were living in California. Sam had reportedly told people that Marilyn became less interested in sex after she gave birth to Chip, so they had an open marriage, and she allowed him to carry on these extramarital affairs, stating, quote, "Marilyn realized better than anyone else that she was not a terrific sexual partner," end quote. Yeah, that doesn't exactly paint Sam in the most flattering light, and his claims about Marilyn being okay with his extramarital affairs were greatly exaggerated. A series of letters were eventually uncovered which had been exchanged between Marilyn and her brother-in-law Steve, as well as Steve's wife Dorothy in 1950. It seemed apparent that Marilyn had been considering divorce, but even though Steve and Dorothy acknowledged Sam's infidelity, they encouraged her to persevere. At one point, Steve even wrote this somewhat ironic statement, quote, "The real problem, though, is for both of you to frankly admit you have made a mess of things, each contributed an equal portion or share to the situation as it now stands. To realize that you owe it to one another and Chip to make this marriage work, even if it kills you, which it won't," end quote. After the Sheppards moved back to Ohio, Sam began his affair with Susan, but it was apparently no big secret within the community. In October of 1953, a Halloween staff party was held at Bayview Hospital, and Sam spent most of the evening dancing with Susan right in front of Marilyn, who remarked to a friend, quote, "There goes the playboy of the Western world," end quote. To avoid a scandal, the Sheppard family tried to put a stop to the affair by encouraging Susan to leave Bay Village and helped her relocate to California. However, in March of 1954, Sam traveled to Los Angeles to attend an osteopathic medical convention and brought Marilyn along with him. Afterward, the couple went to see some friends in Monterey, but Sam told Marilyn that he needed to go back to Los Angeles to see some other acquaintances and said she should remain there. As you probably already guessed, Sam was actually going to see Susan in order to continue their affair, and he took her on a trip to San Diego and bought her a new watch. When the Sheppards returned to Bay Village, Susan discovered the receipt for the watch and learned that Susan had continued writing love letters to Sam at Bayview Hospital. Sam had also allegedly started conducting a new affair with a Bay Village resident named Julie Lossman, who was one of his patients. About a month before the murder, the Sheppards went on a trip to South Bass Island with Julie and her husband, Robert Lossman. At one point, Sam and Julie left together for a walk and were gone for about an hour, and when they returned, Robert slapped Julie out of jealousy and told her that he didn't like that. You might have noticed that I've kept saying that Marilyn was killed inside her house's guest bedroom. The residents did have a master bedroom with a single bed, but things had reportedly gotten so tense in the Sheppard marriage that Sam and Marilyn were no longer sleeping in the same bed, as Marilyn had moved into the guest bedroom, which had twin beds. It's been alleged that Sam told Marilyn that he wanted a divorce, but his parents would never consent to such a thing, which is why he continued to conduct extramarital affairs. Naturally, This caused the police to suspect that Sam may have murdered Marilyn in order to escape the marriage. Another potential theory which was pushed forward is that Marilyn may have been killed when Sam learned that he was not the father of her unborn child. Since Marilyn's mother had died during childbirth and her delivery of Chip had been quite difficult, she seemed very reluctant to have a second baby. Even though Marilyn was 4 months pregnant, the Sheppards did not actually publicly reveal this until they attended a party at Steve Sheppard's house on July the 2nd, 2 days before the murder. The following day, one of Sam's colleagues congratulated him on the news, and Sam reportedly replied, quote, "That's what you get when you go on vacation and don't take prophylactics," end quote. One of the Sheppards' neighbors would claim that Marilyn told her that she could no longer have children with Sam because he had become sterile from spending too much time around X-ray equipment at the hospital. During Marilyn's autopsy, the fetus was extracted from her body and given its own separate autopsy, but even though attempts were made at fetal blood typing, it could not be determined if Sam was the child's biological father, and the fetus was kept inside a jar. However, there were still signs that Marilyn may have been conducting an affair with another man. A woman named Jessie Dill came forward and told investigators that about 2 weeks before the murder, she had struck up a conversation with a woman on a beach in the village of Fairport Harbor. While the woman would not reveal her name, Dill was convinced it was Marilyn, as she said that she had a husband who was a doctor, a son named Chip, and she also happened to be pregnant. The woman apparently told Dill that she had been carrying on an affair with another man for the past 9 months, and he was trying to convince her to get a divorce and marry him instead. Dill also said this woman did not appear to be afraid of her husband, but she seemed more fearful of her current boyfriend. It was never officially confirmed if Dill actually interacted with Marilyn, but she did agree to take a polygraph when she shared this story and wound up passing. Well, as you can imagine, Marilyn's murder received a lot of publicity in the Ohio media, and the coverage made it apparent that Sam was considered to be the prime suspect. On July the 7th, the day of Marilyn's funeral, an article was printed in the Cleveland Press in which Assistant Cuyahoga County Attorney John J. Mann criticized the Sheppard family for the refusal to submit to questioning, stating, quote, "In my 23 years of criminal prosecution, I have never seen flagrant stalling as in this case by the family of Dr. Samuel Sheppard," end quote. Sam agreed to provide an exclusive interview to the Cleveland News in which he started sobbing and insisted that he and Marilyn had a wonderful relationship and he never would have done anything to harm her. In fact, he stated that if Marilyn's unborn child had been a boy, he would have named him after his brother, Steve. Over the course of the next few weeks, the Cleveland Press's coverage of this case would become heavily biased against Sam, thanks largely to their editor-in-chief, Louis B. Seltzer, who was such an influential figure in the area that he had earned the nickname Mr. Cleveland. On July the 9th, the Cleveland Press published a front-page story under the headline, "Dr. Balks at Lie Test," and it reported that other possible suspects had already been cleared by lie detector tests, and they criticized the police investigation for not moving quickly enough. On July the 16th, the newspaper ran an editorial titled "The Finger of Suspicion," which criticized Bay Village officials of being hostile towards outsiders and rebuffing the assistance of the Cleveland Police Department, and the editorial accused Bay Village officials of protecting Sam. At one point, Louis B. Seltzer created a list of 11 questions for Sam and sent them to Bill Corrigan, who arranged for his client to answer them. Most of Sam's answers to these questions had already been provided to police, but one question was, quote, "Do you feel that newspapers, particularly the press, have treated you fairly?" Sam's response was, quote, "No, there has been a great deal of misinformation published." Well, on July the 20th, Seltzer himself started publishing front-page editorials about the case in the Cleveland Press. His first editorial ran under the headline, quote, "Getting Away with Murder," and urged everyone involved in the case to, quote-unquote, "end the nonsense of artificial politeness." The following day, Seltzer published another front-page editorial under the headline, quote, "Why no inquest? Do it now, Dr. Gerber," in which he openly demanded that Dr. Samuel Gerber hold a public inquest into the case. Well, within hours, Gerber publicly announced that he would be holding a public inquest the very next day and had subpoenaed Sam to appear. The inquest took place inside the gymnasium of Normandy Elementary School in front of a large crowd and would last a total of 3 days. Bill Corrigan was not allowed to participate in the inquest or advise his client on any of the questions he answered, and he could only sit in the stands and watch. When Sam appeared, he was still wearing his orthopedic collar and would be questioned for a total of 5.5 hours about the crime, his marriage, and his alleged secret affair with Susan Hayes. On the advice of his attorney, Sam continued to deny the affair, as Corrigan felt these questions were irrelevant to the murder investigation. Sam acknowledged that he last saw Susan when he traveled to Los Angeles for an osteopathic convention earlier that year, but when Dr. Gerber asked him, quote, "You didn't sleep in the same bedroom 4 nights in a row," Sam replied, quote, "No." When Sam was asked to recount the events that took place on the night of the murder, some people felt his answers were too vague and detached. For instance, when Gerber asked if he ran or walked when he went after the intruder on the beach, Sam simply replied, quote, "I can't give you a specific recollection. I proceeded as rapidly as I could," end quote. Near the end of the inquest, Gerber was pressing Sam really hard about the affair, and this caused the crowd, who mostly consisted of local housewives, to start hooting and hollering. Corrigan had hired a court reporter to prepare a transcript of the inquest, and the crowd noise prompted him to openly shout at the reporter to mention the reaction. In response, Gerber decided to have Corrigan ejected from the gymnasium, which caused the crowd to cheer even harder. Following the inquest, Dr. Gerber publicly revealed his own personal coroner's verdict, in which he stated that Marilyn Sheppard was likely killed by her husband. On July the 29th, Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Frank Culleton told Bay Village officials that if they didn't arrest Sam, the Cleveland PD would likely withdraw from the case. Cleveland Police Chief Frank Story had openly expressed his displeasure about his department taking formal control of the case, as he felt that the original investigation from the local authorities had been botched. At one point, Chief Story told the press, quote, "Our feeling is that Sam Sheppard killed his wife, even though we can't prove it. If we had a single shred of evidence against him, I'd send the janitor out to make an arrest," end quote. Well, on July the 30th, the Cleveland Press ran another front-page editorial from Louis B. Seltzer under the headline, quote, "Why isn't Sam Sheppard in jail?" And later editions would add the subtitle, quote, "Quit stalling, bring him in." Seltzer expressed his opinion that Sam should be subject to an intense interrogation, and sure enough, later that same night, at around 10:30 p.m., the Cleveland PD showed up at the home of Sam's parents, where he'd been staying since his own house was still sealed off as a crime scene. Sam was taken into custody and arrested and escorted to the Cuyahoga County Jail in downtown Cleveland. At around midnight, Bill Corrigan showed up at the jail to see his client, but was denied entry and told that no attorneys were allowed inside after 7 p.m. Over the course of the next 3 days, Sam was extensively interrogated by 4 different 2-man teams of detectives who worked in 12-hour rotations. They told Sam that if he confessed, he would be charged with manslaughter rather than murder and only receive a prison sentence of 1 to 10 years, but Sam continued to stick to his story and denied killing Marilyn. While Sam remained incarcerated, the Cleveland Police's Scientific Investigation Unit performed a full forensic examination of the Sheppard residence in hopes that they could turn up some new physical evidence which might implicate Sam. They performed luminol testing, which was still a fairly new process at the time, and were able to uncover traces of what appeared to be a series of blood trails which led from the upstairs hallway to the stairwell to the kitchen to the back door to the basement. However, the testing did not turn up any traces of smears of wiped up blood, which could have been used as evidence that Sam committed the murder and performed some sort of cleanup before he called for help. On August the 16th, after spending 2.5 weeks in jail, Sam was released on a $50,000 bond, and a grand jury proceeding was scheduled the following day in order to discuss the evidence against him. Susan Hayes was flown in from California to Ohio to testify in front of the grand jury and get the details about her affair with Sam on the record. After 1 day of testimony from various eyewitnesses, the grand jury elected to hand down an indictment of first-degree murder, and Sam was promptly rearrested at his parents' home only 30 hours after his release from jail. Shortly thereafter, Dr. Gerber made the controversial decision to have the crime scene dismantled, as he had his staff remove a number of pieces of blood-spattered furniture from the Sheppard residence in order to store them as evidence. This angered the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, as they were hoping to give the jury a tour of the house during Sam's trial and wanted it to look exactly the same as it did after the murder took place. In response, Dr. Gerber had his staff bring the furniture back and put the crime scene back together, but his actions further fueled belief that he was overstepping his boundaries in the investigation. Another issue was that Sam's attorneys hired a forensic expert to perform their own analysis of the murder scene, but Cuyahoga County authorities possessed the keys to the Sheppard residence and kept neglecting to turn them over. As a result, the defense never got to perform a forensic analysis before the trial, and their expert did not testify. So, as you can imagine, this case became the subject of mass media attention all over the United States, and since it would be one of the first high-profile trials to ever be broadcast on television, it earned the moniker the Trial of the Century. However, it soon became apparent that the extensive media coverage was going to cause a number of issues. 75 people would be selected as potential jurors for the trial, but nearly a month before they were even scheduled to report for duty, a number of Cleveland newspapers published their names, addresses, and photos. As a result, these folks started receiving anonymous phone calls and letters and inquiries from strangers who wanted to ask them about the case. The trial judge would be 70-year-old Edward J. Blythen, who had once been the mayor of Cleveland, and at the time, he was facing re-election for his judgeship in the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. Given the high-profile nature of the trial, some people felt this might create issues with Blythen's impartiality, particularly since his own son was a Cleveland homicide detective, but he would not recuse himself. Bill Corrigan would head up Sam's defense team, but even though he asked for a change of venue and a continuance due to the media publicity surrounding the case, they were denied by Judge Blythen, and the trial would take place at Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court in Cleveland. Jury selection would begin on October the 18th, and over 1,500 people showed up to gather outside the courthouse. It would take 2 weeks to assemble a jury of 7 men and 5 women, but all but 2 of the 75 prospective jurors admitted that they had previously heard about the case in the media, and given the sensationalistic nature of the reporting, the defense was concerned about their ability to remain impartial, particularly since the local news outlets had painted Sam as the guilty party before he was even arrested. At one point during the trial, a popular radio show hosted by Walter Winchell broadcast a story about a New York City woman who claimed to be Sam's mistress and was the mother of his illegitimate child. But it turned out that this woman was a sex worker who was serving time in jail for robbing a customer at gunpoint, and when New York police investigated her claims about Sam, they completely discounted them. The jury was not sequestered during the trial, and even though 2 of the jurors admitted to having heard the broadcast with this disproven story about Sam's so-called illegitimate child, they assured Judge Blythen that it wouldn't influence their verdict, and he decided not to dismiss them. After jury selection was completed, the trial officially kicked off on November the 4th and lasted for 9.5 weeks. The lead prosecutor was Assistant Cuyahoga County Attorney John J. Mann, who had just been elected to a judgeship, so this would be his last murder trial. The prosecution alleged that Sam and Marilyn had gotten into a heated quarrel about his extramarital affairs, which led to him bludgeoning her to death in the guest bedroom. He then pulled up Marilyn's pajama top and pulled down her pajama bottoms to make it look like she had been the victim of an attempted sex crime, and then fabricated a story about him struggling with an unidentified, bushy-haired intruder. After the jury visited the Sheppard residence to view the murder scene, the first prosecution witness to testify at the trial was Dr. Lester Adelson, who performed Marilyn's autopsy. Dr. Adelson made the controversial decision to display slides featuring graphic photographs of Marilyn's murdered body, which horrified everyone in the courtroom. In fact, Sam asked for permission to leave the courtroom so he would not have to view the photos, but when his request was denied, he turned his back on them to avoid looking. Since displaying graphic crime scene photos at a murder trial was a relatively new thing back in 1954, the defense feared that this would unfairly influence the jury. Even though Adelson testified that Marilyn had not been sexually assaulted and he failed to turn up any trace of sperm, the defense attempted to discredit him on cross-examination as they alleged that his autopsy had been perfunctory and he never even checked for seminal fluid. The murder weapon was never found, but when Dr. Gerber took the stand to testify, he mentioned that there was an imprint on Marilyn's blood-stained pillow, which he believed resembled a surgical instrument that Sam may have used to fatally bludgeon her. Since this was based on nothing more than speculation, Corrigan objected to Gerber's remark and demanded that it be stricken from the record, but Judge Blythen denied his request. The prosecution alleged that the blood trails which had shown up on the luminol testing were caused by blood dripping from the murder weapon, which Sam carried through the house before he disposed of it. However, the defense tried to debunk this theory by arguing that the blood would have coagulated, so the luminol testing should have shown heavier drips in the upstairs hallway, which gradually tapered off before they reached the downstairs area. Believe it or not, an alternate explanation that the defense presented is that the Sheppard's family dog, Coco, had once ran through the house while dripping blood and experiencing menstruation, so this blood trail may have been left there by her long before the crime took place. You might recall that when police first arrived at the murder scene, the only blood that Sam had on him was a large stain on the left knee of his pants. There was no actual blood spatter on him which could have been caused by bludgeoning Marilyn, so Gerber believed that Sam kneeled down in a pool of blood at some point. Since Sam's pants were wet, the prosecution suspected that he went down to the beach and washed himself off in Lake Erie. Mary Cowan, the chief medical technologist at the Cuyahoga County Coroner's Office, testified that Marilyn had type O blood, and she believed that the blood on Sam's pants appeared to be type O, though she could not be entirely certain. However, Cowan also poked a hole in the prosecution's theory about Sam washing himself off in the lake when she admitted that blood cannot be completely removed once it contacts fabric, and that testing would have turned up microscopic traces of blood on Sam's pants if they had been there. I mentioned earlier that even though Dr. Gerber told the press that the Sheppard residence had been wiped clean of fingerprints, this was not true since a number of smudged, unidentifiable fingerprints were found at the scene which could not be matched to anyone. Well, a fingerprint expert testified that he was able to recover one print from the headboard of Marilyn's bed, which he believed was Sam's left thumbprint. But of course, the defense countered with the argument that even if the print did belong to Sam, it wasn't unusual for a husband's thumbprint to be found on his wife's bed, as Sam could have left it there some time before the murder. While the prosecution acknowledged that Sam had sustained injuries on the night of the murder, they believed that the injuries were caused by Marilyn fighting back against him, rather than from a scuffle with an intruder. They also alleged that since Sam was treated by his brothers at his family's hospital, they greatly exaggerated the seriousness of his injuries. Steve Sheppard testified that when he first arrived at the murder scene and examined Sam, he immediately determined that his injuries were life-threatening. When he first touched his brother's neck, Steve claimed that there were muscle spasms and involuntary movements which caused Sam to black out, and he practically had to be dragged to the hospital for treatment. A number of other doctors and nurses from Bayview Hospital would back up Steve's assessment, as one of the X-ray technicians testified that Sam couldn't even open his mouth to drink water because of the pain he was experiencing. However, at the request of Dr. Gerber, another physician named Dr. E.R. Hexter, who was not affiliated with Bayview Hospital, had paid a visit there in order to perform an independent examination of Sam at around 2:30 p.m. on the afternoon of July the 4th, which is around 10 hours after he was supposedly attacked. Even though Dr. Hexter acknowledged that Sam had some missing reflexes on the left side of his body, he said he found no serious outward injury to the neck, and that Sam managed to move his head around without any pain. Dr. Gerber and his supervising physicians also claimed that when they received Sam's x-rays, they did not reveal signs of any fractures to his vertebra. In addition, Sam said that he had been choked by the intruder after scuffling with them on the beach, but no scratches or bruises were found on Sam's neck. He did not have any noticeable hoarseness in his voice when he spoke to people following this alleged attack, and no signs of struggle were found on the beach when police examined it. Sam wound up being discharged from Bayview Hospital only 4 days after the crime took place, and returned to work there only 3 days after that, which the prosecution felt was strong evidence that Sam's injuries weren't as severe as he claimed. At the request of the Sheppard family, Dr. Charles Elkins, the chief neurosurgeon at Cleveland City Hospital, agreed to perform his own examination, and he testified that Sam had suffered a cervical concussion, nerve injuries, and a serious injury in the region of the second cervical vertebra. Dr. Elkins also said that Sam had many missing or weak reflexes on the left side of his body, and he felt it would have been impossible for Sam to fake them, as well as the neck spasms he experienced when Elkins pressed on the second cervical vertebra. The allegations of a Sheppard family cover-up only increased following the testimony of Mayor Spencer Houck, the first person summoned to the Sheppard residence following the murder. The authorities always found it very suspicious that after being attacked and discovering that his wife had been killed, Sam elected to phone Spencer rather than calling the police or the hospital. They theorized that Sam may have been attempting to use his friendship with the town mayor in order to shield himself from the police investigation. Well, a source in law enforcement leaked to the press that Spencer had failed 2 questions on a lie detector test, and rumors started circulating that he had conducted a secret affair with Marilyn and may have been the real father of her unborn child. In the days following the murder, Spencer also seemed anxious to convince Steve Sheppard that his brother should confess to killing Marilyn, which Steve felt came across as a strategy for Spencer to direct suspicion away from himself. At one point, Steve shared his suspicions with the Cleveland PD, and they agreed to bring Spencer to Cleveland Central Police Station, where he was questioned for 4 hours and informed about the allegations against him. The police asked Steve to come down to the station as well, and when he entered the interrogation room, Spencer stood up and called him a liar and had to be restrained from punching Steve. Spencer was released from custody as there was no evidence to indicate he was involved in Marilyn's murder, but the whole situation caused so much pressure for Spencer that he suffered a nervous breakdown and wound up in bed under sedation. Spencer was called upon to testify at Sam's trial, and he claimed that he once had a conversation with Marilyn in which she described Sam as being a quote-unquote Jekyll and Hyde who had a much different personality in private than he did in public. Spencer also made the shocking claim that after Richard Sheppard discovered Marilyn's body, he immediately asked his brother if he had anything to do with what happened, to which Sam replied, quote, "Hell no." Well, the defense objected to Spencer's claim, as Sam and Richard both adamantly denied that this exchange ever took place. Indeed, Spencer had already testified as a witness at the public inquest and initially claimed that he had seen Richard talking to Sam following the discovery of Marilyn's body, but he couldn't hear their conversation. Detective Robert Schottky testified about what he perceived to be inconsistencies in Sam's changing story about what happened, alleging that Sam initially claimed he was attacked in the upstairs hallway before he said he was knocked out in the guest bedroom, and he also did not mention chasing his attacker down to the beach in his original statements. Schottky also found it odd that after regaining consciousness in his bedroom, Sam went to the trouble of picking his wallet up off the floor and putting it in his pocket before checking Marilyn's body, and he only added this detail to his story after Schottky asked Sam why he was carrying it. But to the surprise of the prosecution, when Cuyahoga County Deputy Sheriff Carl Rosbach took the stand, he seemed to contradict Schottky's testimony by stating that Sam's story remained largely consistent. For their part, the defense said that Sam's injuries and his concussion caused him to become confused and disoriented, which could have accounted for why he neglected to mention certain details of his story during his original statements to police. The defense alleged that Sam's story about an intruder was supported by 2 eyewitnesses who had been driving home during the early morning hours of July the 4th and claimed that they saw an unidentified, bushy-haired man in a white shirt near the Sheppard residence. But it's worth noting that they didn't come forward to report this sighting until 10 days after the fact, when a $10,000 reward had been offered for information. In addition, a neighbor who lived directly across the street from the Sheppard residence recalled having seen lights on inside the house, both upstairs and downstairs, at around 2:15 a.m. on July the 4th, even though Sam and Marilyn should have both been sleeping at this point, and Sam said the lights were off when he woke up. Another piece of evidence which seemed to support the presence of an intruder was when Steve testified about having seen a cigarette butt floating in the upstairs toilet when he arrived at the residence on the morning of the murder. Sam and Marilyn did not smoke, but while a police sergeant took the stand to confirm also having seen the cigarette, it was never entered into evidence and can no longer be found. The prosecution's star witness would be Susan Hayes, who took the stand to testify about her 3-year affair with Sam. This marked the first time that Susan's name was released publicly, as up until this point, the media coverage had only referred to her as Miss X in order to protect her identity. The prosecution hoped to convince the jury that the affair could have given Sam motive to murder Marilyn and escape their marriage, particularly since he had allegedly told her that his family would not approve of him divorcing her. However, when Susan testified, she said that even though Sam had spoken about a possible divorce with Marilyn, he also said that he loved his wife very much, and Susan never saw signs of any violence or anger from Sam. While there were undeniably problems with the Sheppards' marriage, Dawn and Nancy Ahern both claimed that when they attended their dinner party on the night before the crime, Sam and Marilyn acted very affectionate towards each other, and they sensed no tension between them or any warning signs that a murder was about to take place. In fact, Nancy said that Marilyn had once told her that even though she was upset when Sam went off to continue his affair with Susan during their trip to California, they actually had a wonderful time during the rest of the vacation, and Marilyn sensed that Sam had fallen in love with her again. But Nancy's testimony seemed to be contradicted by a doctor friend of Sam's named Lester Hovertston, who had been a house guest of the Sheppards a few days before the murder and claimed that Sam had told him he was thinking of divorcing his wife. Marilyn greatly disliked Hovertston because he was a known womanizer who constantly hit on her and encouraged Sam to seek out his extramarital affairs. In fact, during his stay at the Sheppard residence, he attempted to antagonize Marilyn by bringing up Sam's affair with Susan. There was a brief period when Hovertston was looked at as a potential suspect in the murder, but since he had spent the night with another friend at the residence in Kent, 50 miles away, he had an airtight alibi. Hovertston also testified that after the crime took place, he went to visit Sam at Bayview Hospital and overheard Steve say to him, quote, "Let's go over the sequence of events so you can get your story straight," end quote. Sam actually took the stand to testify in his own defense and acknowledged that he made a mistake when he denied having an affair with Susan during his original interviews with police and when he testified at the inquest. Sam claimed that he did this on the advice of his attorney and because he wanted to protect Susan's reputation and keep her out of the spotlight. He maintained that even though there had been problems in his marriage with Marilyn and that she had become less interested in sex following the birth of their son, he had no plans to get a divorce and never would have done anything to harm her. Sam's testimony took place over the course of 2 separate days, and while he did a fairly good job at defending himself, some people felt that a number of his responses were too vague, as he answered no less than 328 questions with phrases like, quote, "I don't know, I can't say, or I don't recall." Sam also did not make a good impression with the jury when he was asked if other people could have shed blood in the house, and he revealed that Marilyn sometimes had issues with her period and was on medication to stimulate blood formation. Needless to say, a man openly talking about his wife's menstrual cycle at a murder trial was a much more taboo subject back in 1954. During closing arguments, prosecutor John J. Mann provided a new potential explanation for Sam's neck injuries by alleging that after he killed Marilyn, Sam could have made a failed suicide attempt by throwing himself off a bluff into Lake Erie, but the cold water caused him to change his mind and he swam back to shore. The jury began deliberations on Friday, December the 17th, and worked over the weekend, but after discussing the case for over 100 hours, they returned to the courtroom with a verdict on Tuesday, December the 21st. They announced that they had found Sam not guilty of murder in the first degree, but instead found him guilty of murder in the second degree. During the early stages of deliberation, the jury had been split at a vote of 7-5 in favor of conviction before they soon settled on a unanimous guilty verdict, but it took them a while to decide whether to convict Sam on first-degree murder, second-degree murder, or the lesser charge of manslaughter. When Sam was asked if he wanted to make a statement, he still insisted that he was innocent of the crime, so Judge Blythen sentenced him to life imprisonment at the Ohio State Penitentiary in Columbus with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Well, Sam's life would only get worse, as during jury deliberations, his father, Richard Sheppard Sr., had to be hospitalized with pleurisy, and tests soon revealed that he had terminal stomach cancer. On July the 7th, 1955, only 2.5 weeks after his conviction, Sam was informed that his mother, Ethel Sheppard, had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at the age of 64. Ethel had been staying at Steve's residence, but after pulling her son's gun out of a dresser, she went into a bedroom and took her own life. Ethel left behind a note which read, quote, "Dear Steve, I can't manage with Dad. Thanks for everything, Mother," end quote. And she also included a blank check to pay for the cleanup of the bedroom. Prior to Sam's trial, Ethel had to be hospitalized, and while her family told the press that she had suffered a stroke, it would later come out that Ethel had attempted suicide by swallowing a bottle of sleeping pills until Steve and Richard Sr. managed to save her by pumping her stomach. The family convinced Ethel to keep going by telling her that a suicide would potentially hurt Sam's chances at his trial, but his conviction wound up being a breaking point for her. When Sam learned about his mother's death, he broke down sobbing and stated, quote, "Today, my mother took her life as a result of American injustice," end quote. If that wasn't bad enough, on January the 18th, only 11 days following the loss of his wife, Richard Sheppard Sr. also died at the age of 64 after a hemorrhaging gastric ulcer. Sam was given permission to attend both of his parents' funerals, but was required to wear handcuffs the entire time. Well, Bill Corrigan immediately filed an appeal in hopes of overturning Sam's conviction. I previously mentioned that the defense wanted their own forensic expert to perform an analysis of the murder scene, but were unable to do so because the authorities failed to turn over the keys to the Sheppard residence. In fact, they did not give back the keys until the day after Sam's trial concluded, but Corrigan soon hired the services of Dr. Paul Leland Kirk, a noted criminologist from the University of California at Berkeley who had worked on the Manhattan Project during World War II. After visiting the crime scene and performing his own forensic analysis, Dr. Kirk published a 19-page report about his findings. Based on the pattern of the blood spatter at the scene, Kirk concluded that Marilyn's attacker was left-handed, which seemed to favor Sam's innocence since he was right-handed. According to Kirk, the east side of the bedroom had a horizontal arc of larger blood spots across the wall and closet doors, and he believed that this was cast-off blood from the murder weapon. Kirk felt the spatter could have only been produced by the backswing of a left-handed assailant swinging a weapon which was at least 1 foot long. After performing reenactments of Sam's version of events, Kirk reached the conclusion that his story was plausible and that Marilyn was killed by someone else who had a hatred for the Sheppard family. Kirk also wanted to test out the prosecution's theory that the blood trail which had shown up on the luminol testing had been caused by blood dripping from the murder weapon. He performed an experiment by dipping the ends of a number of different weapons into a large beaker of human blood and then carrying them across a runner of paper on the floor to create a trail. The results showed that the dripping blood congealed and greatly decreased after Dr. Kirk walked about 15 feet, which seemed to debunk the idea that Sam could have carried a dripping murder weapon throughout the entire house. Since 2 of Marilyn's teeth fragments were found in her bedsheets, the authorities had alleged that her teeth were broken when she was beaten or bludgeoned. However, Kirk disagreed with this theory because he felt that pieces of Marilyn's teeth would have been found inside her mouth and her lips would have been severely damaged. Since this was not the case, Kirk felt that Marilyn's teeth had been broken when she bit her attacker, and since Sam had no bite marks or open wounds on his body, this was another piece of evidence which seemed to point away from him being the killer. If the killer had been bitten and received a flowing wound, this could have provided an alternate explanation for the blood trail in the house. Based on the conclusions from Kirk's report, Corrigan filed a motion for a new trial, but it was denied by the 8th District Court of Appeals for the state of Ohio. Even though Sam's defense team were never provided with the keys to his residence prior to the trial, the Court of Appeals noted that the defense had never formally asked for the opportunity to conduct a forensic examination there, even though the prosecution likely would have granted the request. As a result, the court did not believe this was sufficient grounds for a new trial. Over the next few years, Corrigan filed some additional appeals, including one to the Ohio Supreme Court, but they were all rejected. Well, even though no one fully understood its significance at the time, one of the most important developments in this story took place in November of 1959, when the Rocky River Police Department received complaints about a number of thefts which had occurred at various residences in Rocky River, Bay Village, and Westlake. The alleged culprit was 29-year-old Richard Eberling, who ran a window washing business called Dick's Cleaning Service, which allowed him access to his clients' homes, and they had started to suspect that he was using this opportunity to steal from them. A Rocky River police detective named George Gindra showed up at Eberling's residence to question him, and it wasn't long before Eberling confessed to being responsible for these thefts and allowed Gindra to perform a search of his home for the stolen items. Well, he wound up uncovering an engagement ring and a cocktail ring which once belonged to Marilyn Sheppard, and she had even been wearing them on her fingers when she was murdered. However, Everling claimed that he had stolen these rings 2 years earlier from the home of Sam's brother, Richard Sheppard Jr., as Everling had found them inside a box labeled Property of Marilyn Sheppard. This part of the story did check out, as Richard and his wife Dorothy had been given a number of Marilyn's personal items following her death and had reported these rings stolen in 1957. But it turned out that Sam and Marilyn had been former customers of Everling, and he had visited their residence to wash their windows numerous times. In fact, Everling was interviewed by a detective during the early stages of the murder investigation, but he did not offer any useful information, as he mentioned having a friendly relationship with Marilyn, but had only met Sam on one occasion. Well, following the discovery of the stolen items, Everling was arrested and charged with larceny, and he wound up being given a 90-day suspended sentence and a $300 fine. However, due to the Sheppard connection, Detective Jindra decided to ask Everling a few questions about the case, and even decided to call his bluff by inquiring why Everling's blood had turned up in the Sheppard residence following the murder. Of course, this piece of information was not true, but to Jindra's surprise, Everling responded by saying that he had cut his finger while removing some storm windows in the Sheppard's kitchen on July 2, 1954, 2 days before the crime took place. Everling initially claimed that he only dripped blood in the kitchen and immediately wiped it up, but later changed his story and said that he bled throughout the residence before he walked downstairs into the basement to wash his finger. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, Everling initially said that he was at home and went to bed at around 11:30 p.m., but he once again changed his story and said that it was sometime after 1 a.m. The Rocky River PD was intrigued enough by Everling that they asked him if he would be willing to take a polygraph exam and answer questions about the murder. Everling agreed to the request and received a polygraph from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, and the examiner concluded that Everling did not show deception in his answers. This pretty much closed the books on the investigation into Everling, but years later, some shocking events would occur that brought Everling right back to the forefront of this case. And this was definitely not the end of the story with Sam Sheppard, as he would soon acquire the services of an ambitious defense attorney named F. Lee Bailey, who eventually got the case heard in front of the United States Supreme Court. But we'll talk more about that next time. Yes, I'm sorry folks, I'm going to have to leave you on a cliffhanger, but join us next week for part 2 as we continue to explore the murder of Marilyn Reese Sheppard and the controversial conviction of Sam Sheppard, which wound up paving the way to a landmark Supreme Court ruling, a retrial, and a civil trial which took place decades later. I will share my theories and analysis of this story in part 3, but if you have your own thoughts about what happened, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email to robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Now, the reminder that The Trail Went Cold is on Patreon, so please visit patreon.com/thetrailwentcold to learn how you can support our podcast and become eligible for some pretty neat rewards. Over the course of nearly 7 years, our Patreon page has released around 80 exclusive bonus episodes, which are all currently available in our archives for our patrons in tiers 2 and 3. This past month, I released the audio of a panel session I participated in at the Berkshire Podcast Festival back in October, titled Life in True Crime, which was moderated by Josh Hallmark of the True Crime Bullshit podcast, and featured yours truly discussing my life in true crime podcasting alongside Charlie from Crime Lines, Lainey from True Crime Cases, and Robert Palmer from the Broken System podcast. I've also dropped an exclusive bonus episode from my spin-off podcast, The Path Went Chilly, in which myself and one of my co-hosts, Jules, discussed the 1979 murder of Deborah Jackson, a victim who was formerly an unidentified Jane Doe known only as Orange Socks. And for our patrons in Tier 3, I've recorded another new audio commentary track, which can be played over a classic episode of Unsolved Mysteries, and we now have over 70 of these commentary tracks in archives. I'd also like to give a shout out to our most recent listeners who have signed up with us on Patreon this week, and they are Amanda W., Lori S., and Ray Ray. Thank you all so much for your support. I'd also like to remind everyone that in a month and a half, The Trail Went Cold will be appearing at a new event called AdvocacyCon, which is taking place from March the 28th to the 30th at the Indianapolis Marriott East Hotel in Indianapolis, Indiana. It's being put together by fellow podcasters Eric from True Consequences and Melissa and Whitney from Navigating Advocacy, and is intended as a platform for the families of missing and murdered victims. We have a specialized promo code you can use to get a discount on tickets, so if you would like to attend, please visit their website, advocacycon.com, and use code TRAIL10 to get 10% off. Once again, the website is advocacycon.com, and the promo code is TRAIL10 for 10% off tickets. And one final reminder that this coming Saturday, February the 22nd, we'll be holding one of our Unsolved Mysteries Live Watch Marathons, in which I screen classic segments from the show, and you can watch them and chat with myself and your fellow listeners. It's taking place at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and if you'd like to join us, you can find the link to our screening room in our show notes, as well as pinned to the top of our social media pages. I just wanted to give another shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. I need to provide a big thanks to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composed the eerie music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, or leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, Podcast Addict, or whatever your favorite podcasting platform is. So have yourself a great week and join us next Wednesday as we present part 2 of our special 3-part 9-year anniversary episode of The Trail Went Cold.